I was in the courtroom that morning, sitting quietly near the back, waiting for the judge to finish up the previous case. It was a standard municipal hearing, nothing unusual on the docket. I was there as a legal assistant, helping review documents for a traffic enforcement case. Nothing that would warrant drama. But the moment Officer Travis Nolan walked in, the air shifted. He entered in full uniform, stiff posture, sunglasses still on despite being indoors. His gaze scanned the room like a hawk, focused, impatient, a little too sure of himself. Then he spotted her. She was already seated near the front, wearing a plain black blazer and slacks. Confident, quiet, and unreadable. She had a small folder in front of her, no attorney beside her, and no indication of nervousness. Officer Nolan stared at her as if he recognized her, or thought he did. And then he did something that made everyone in the room take notice. He walked directly up to her seat. "You don't belong up here," he said, arms crossed. "This area's for witnesses and legal counsel only." She slowly raised her eyes to meet his. Calm. Unblinking. "I'm aware," she replied, her voice firm and low. "Please return to your seat, officer." The room froze. Travis leaned down slightly. "Excuse me." The judge hadn't entered yet, so no one was there to stop this from escalating. She calmly opened her folder and slid out a single laminated credential, barely lifting it for him to see. What happened next would change the entire energy of the courtroom. Officer Nolan took the ID she handed him, reluctantly, and looked down at it. His expression shifted in slow motion. His jaw tightened. His brows furrowed. Then he straightened up, blinked twice, and looked at her again, as if seeing her for the very first time. "You're with Internal Affairs," he said, voice suddenly lower, cautious. "Deputy Director," she clarified, reaching out and calmly retrieving her credentials. "Assigned to oversee compliance investigations across multiple precincts. Including yours." The silence in the room thickened. A few people in the gallery exchanged glances. Travis took a step back without realizing it, the confidence draining from his posture like a deflating balloon. "But, no one informed me of a visit," he stammered. "That was intentional," she said, folding the folder shut. "Unannounced evaluations reveal more truth than scheduled interviews." He opened his mouth again, but no words came. Just then, the courtroom door opened, and the judge entered. "All rise." Everyone stood, but the real authority in the room had already made itself known. Officer Nolan remained stiff, standing too straight now, his mind clearly racing. He didn't look at her again, not directly. She, on the other hand, didn't flinch. She stood tall. Calm. In control. She wasn't just a witness. She wasn't just a civilian. She was here to evaluate him, and he'd just tried to remove her from the courtroom like a trespasser. As the judge took the bench and began calling the docket, Officer Nolan retreated to the side, his eyes down, his mind clearly miles away from the minor citation case he'd come to testify in. The woman, Deputy Director Elise Morgan, remained perfectly composed, seated in the front row as if she owned the courtroom. And in a way, she did. Not by title alone, but by presence. The bailiff announced the next case, a motion to dismiss an alleged improper search conducted by Officer Nolan. Elise didn't even shift in her seat. When Nolan was called to testify, he stood up like a man walking toward a trap he'd unknowingly helped set. His voice was suddenly much softer than before. He avoided glancing at Elise entirely. He gave his version of events. It was clear, practiced, procedural, but something was off. The judge even paused at one moment, raising an eyebrow. "Officer Nolan," the judge said, "you said the defendant gave verbal consent to search her vehicle. Was that before or after you opened the door?" "Before," he replied quickly. "Do you have that recorded on your body cam?" He hesitated. "It cut out during the stop, Your Honor." Technical malfunction. From the front row, Elise calmly made a note on a small legal pad. Nolan saw it and swallowed hard. The defense attorney raised an objection to the credibility of the search. The judge didn't immediately rule, instead setting the matter for review, including the officer's full report and any supporting files. The case wasn't over. But it was unraveling. And Travis Nolan knew, for the first time, that someone far above him was watching every move, not later, not in some report, but right there, in real time. After court recessed for a short break, Officer Nolan slipped out of the courtroom fast. But Elise didn't follow. She wasn't chasing him, she didn't need to. Instead, she calmly made her way to a small conference room just down the hall. A few minutes later, a clerk walked by and politely asked the officer to step in. He looked hesitant, but obeyed. Inside, the door closed behind him with a soft click. Elise was already seated at the table, her badge and internal affairs documents neatly arranged in front of her. "Sit down," she said without looking up. He did. Slowly. "Officer Nolan," she began, "do you recall the departmental bulletin sent out 6 weeks ago regarding the IA compliance spot checks?" He blinked. "Yes, but you didn't think it would be you. Most don't." She finally looked up. "But your record flagged 2 separate complaints in the past quarter. One was dismissed. The other's still pending." "They were false claims, that will be determined after review," she cut in. "What concerns me is your behavior today. You confronted me publicly in a courtroom, without reason, before even asking who I was." He opened his mouth to protest but stopped. "You treated me as if I didn't belong," she continued. "No uniform. No recognition. Just judgment. That same approach, that immediate suspicion, is what's led to several complaints tied to your stops." Travis sat still, the color fading from his face. "I'm placing a formal hold on your current patrol duties," she said calmly. "Effective immediately. You'll report for a disciplinary hearing next Monday." He looked stunned. "I suggest you use the time to reflect, officer. That courtroom moment." She leaned in slightly. "You thought you were in control. But the real authority doesn't always wear a badge where you can see it." She stood, collected her folder, and walked out without another word. Officer Nolan sat frozen. He wasn't used to being the one under the microscope. The news spread through the precinct faster than any official memo. By the end of the day, most of the officers had heard the story, how Travis Nolan had confronted a woman in court, only to find out she was a deputy director from Internal Affairs. Some laughed behind closed doors. Others didn't say a word, aware they could just as easily be next. Nolan returned to the station that evening to clear out his gear, his locker now labeled with a temporary suspension notice. The sergeant on duty gave him a short nod but didn't make eye contact. The same man who used to bark orders and strut through the department was suddenly just another name under review. Meanwhile, Deputy Director Elise Morgan submitted her preliminary report. It was professional, detailed, and backed by courtroom transcripts and prior complaints. But what stood out most was her final paragraph. This officer demonstrated not only a lapse in protocol, but a troubling tendency to assume authority without verification. His behavior toward a presumed civilian, who turned out to be his superior, reveals the exact mindset Internal Affairs aims to correct. Authority must be grounded in discipline, not assumption. By Friday, the precinct's leadership quietly scheduled mandatory retraining on courtroom conduct and bias oversight, sessions Nolan had once rolled his eyes at during staff meetings. Now, his name was used as the example. He hadn't been fired, yet. But he knew the hearing on Monday could go either way. And more importantly, he now understood something he hadn't before: not everyone you look down on is beneath you. Some are just seated, waiting for the right moment to stand. Monday morning arrived with heavy silence. Officer Nolan sat outside the internal hearing room in plain clothes, no badge, no belt, no radio. Just a stiff dress shirt and a clipboard full of character references he hoped might help his case. The hearing panel consisted of 3 people, a legal advisor, a precinct captain, and Deputy Director Elise Morgan. When he stepped in and took his seat across from them, it hit him all over again. The authority he had once casually challenged was now deciding the future of his career. "Officer Nolan," the captain began, "this is a formal internal review. You'll be given a chance to speak. But first, Deputy Director Morgan will present her findings." Elise didn't waste time. She stood, crisp and composed, and presented a direct summary of what had happened, not just in the courtroom, but in the pattern of field behavior that had preceded it. She read from citizen reports. She played audio from a past traffic stop where his tone was aggressive and assumptive, despite full cooperation from the driver. She referenced timestamps, files, and even excerpts from Nolan's own case reports that contradicted his verbal statements in court. Nolan sat still, eyes low. When it was his turn to speak, he tried to offer an apology. "I didn't know who you were that day. I just thought, that's exactly the problem," Elise said, cutting in gently but firmly. "You thought." The room fell silent. "You assumed, you acted, and only afterward did you learn the truth. That mindset has consequences. Not just for you, but for the public you swore to serve." He swallowed. "I understand that now." She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She simply looked at him for a long, silent moment. The panel stepped out for deliberation. 20 minutes later, they returned. "Officer Nolan," the captain announced, "your badge will not be permanently revoked, yet. However, your suspension is extended pending completion of intensive retraining, reassignment, and a 6-month probationary oversight under Deputy Director Morgan's office." Nolan exhaled, part relief, part regret. He hadn't lost his job. But he'd lost his comfort. His shield of assumed authority had cracked, and now, real accountability had replaced it. As he stood to leave, Elise gave him one final look. "Next time you walk into a courtroom," she said, "remember, it's not about who looks important. It's about who acts with integrity." 2 weeks into his reassignment, Travis Nolan was no longer Officer Nolan. Now, he was simply Mr. Nolan, probationary trainee, seated every morning in a small, windowless training center with a dozen younger recruits who hadn't even passed their field exams yet. He wasn't allowed to patrol. He wasn't allowed to carry a sidearm. He wasn't even allowed to wear his uniform. The first few days were humiliating. Every instructor knew who he was. Most didn't treat him any differently, but they didn't need to. The silence around him said enough. But what stung more was that every Thursday afternoon, without fail, Deputy Director Elise Morgan personally reviewed his progress report. Not in person. Not yet. But he knew her eyes were on every quiz, every scenario video, every peer review sheet. He was no longer being judged for how he looked in uniform, but how he behaved under pressure. And it showed. One afternoon, during a de-escalation exercise, a young recruit mishandled the scenario, shouting over the actor playing a distressed driver. The instructor was about to correct him when Travis raised a hand. "Mind if I try?" he asked. Permission granted. He reset the scene. This time, he approached the actor calmly, asked questions instead of making demands, and waited. Not once did he raise his voice or posture with fake authority. The instructor raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect that from you." Travis gave a small nod. "Neither did I. But I'm learning." And he meant it. He'd spent years thinking the badge gave him authority. Now he was beginning to understand, true authority came from control, respect, and discipline, even when no one's watching. Especially then. By the 5th week, word about Nolan's quiet transformation started circulating, not loudly, not with fanfare, but in the small respectful nods from instructors and the lack of smirks from the other trainees. He wasn't trying to be anyone's leader. He wasn't trying to salvage his image. He was listening. One evening, after a full day of scenario training, he received an unexpected calendar invite, one-on-one review, Deputy Director Elise Morgan, Friday, 10 a.m. It wasn't optional. He arrived early that Friday, dressed neatly, notebook in hand. This time, he didn't try to fake confidence. He simply knocked, entered when called, and sat down across from her. Elise looked up briefly from her tablet, then gestured toward the chair. "Mr. Nolan," she began. "Your instructors have submitted updated evaluations. Improved scores. Cooperative behavior. And most notably, restraint." He nodded once. "I've had time to think." "Yes, you have," she replied. Then she leaned forward slightly. "But thinking isn't the same as changing. What's different now?" He didn't hesitate. "I used to think my job was about control. But now I get it, it's about service. And trust isn't automatic. It's earned, every time you step out in public." She studied him for a long, quiet second. "Do you believe you're ready to return to duty?" "No," he said plainly. "But I believe I'm ready to continue learning, without shortcuts this time." That answer landed. Elise closed her tablet, stood, and offered him something he hadn't expected, her hand. "You'll complete your final week under direct observation. After that, the panel will vote. But regardless of the outcome," she said, "this version of you is someone I can respect." He shook her hand, firm and steady. For the first time, the courtroom mistake that nearly ended his career felt less like a punishment, and more like a turning point. The final week of training arrived, and with it came the unexpected challenge that would test whether Travis Nolan had truly changed, or just learned how to behave under scrutiny. During a field exercise meant to simulate a traffic stop gone tense, one of the newer recruits panicked. The actor portraying the driver shouted, flailed his arms, and reached suddenly into the glove compartment. The recruit froze, and the situation spiraled. But before the instructor could intervene, Travis stepped forward. "Sir," he said calmly to the actor, "I see your hands moving, I need you to stop. I'm not here to hurt you. Just talk to me. That's it." The actor paused. The room went still. The tension dropped. "You want my license?" the actor said. "I want to make sure you're safe first. Then yes, we'll get to that." The moment ended quietly. Smoothly. The instructor nodded once. That was textbook. Better than textbook, it was human. The exercise ended, and the group began their debrief. But Travis noticed someone else had quietly entered the observation booth. Deputy Director Elise Morgan. She had watched the whole thing, arms crossed, saying nothing, just watching. Later that afternoon, she called a private meeting with the review panel. By Monday morning, Travis was summoned once more. He stood at attention, dressed in a clean uniform again, but without the same blind pride he once carried. The precinct captain looked at him. "Probation completed," he said. "Suspension lifted. You're reinstated, with conditions." Elise stepped forward with a final folder. "For the next 6 months, you'll serve in community patrol only. No solo duty. No tactical assignments. Every interaction is to be logged and reviewed. You'll report weekly, directly to me." Travis nodded. "Understood." She paused, then added, "This isn't just a second chance, Mr. Nolan. It's your first real one." And just like that, he was a cop again. But this time, not the same one who'd walked into that courtroom, assuming he knew everything. This time, he was listening. 6 months later, Travis Nolan stood quietly at the edge of a community park, watching a group of neighborhood kids play tag under the late afternoon sun. He wasn't in a patrol car. He wasn't giving orders. He was just there, visible, approachable, steady. This was his new post, community patrol, walking beat. Schools, parks, corner stores. It didn't come with prestige, but it came with something he'd never had before. Trust. He learned names. He shook hands. He listened. Gone were the quick assumptions, the commanding barks, the stiff posture of someone trying to dominate a scene. In their place stood a man who now understood, leadership wasn't in the uniform, it was in how you made people feel in your presence. That evening, he returned to the precinct and found a sealed envelope on his desk. No label. Just an official stamp. Inside, a formal letter of completion. Probation terminated. Full reinstatement approved. And at the bottom, handwritten in ink, accountability doesn't break character. It reveals it. D.D. Morgan. He stared at the words for a long moment. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply folded the letter, placed it gently in his locker, and zipped up his jacket. Outside, the sun had started to set. And for the first time in a long time, Travis Nolan walked out of the building not to enforce the law, but to serve it, with the humility that only comes after falling hard and rising slower. The courtroom moment that once nearly ended his career had instead become the beginning of the person he was always meant to be.